When Elena first came out, I didn't get her. It's not because I didn't like her. I mean, look at this. This is so cool. But at the time, I had already spent my lapis on Sacred Shield Charlotte, a very, very good magic tank at the time. As a result, I spent the next few months watching my friend list populated with Elenas, and it wasn't until Neo Visions that I finally got her by chance. And recently they gave a free Elena, so it doesn't feel as special anymore. Alright, Elena's Trustmaster reward has been buffed. With more attack and good variants, it's a very capable two-handed sword. Her Super Trustmaster reward hasn't received a buff, but it's excellent regardless. 60% boost to attack and magic, plus a 50% boost when single wielding? That's fantastic for most damage dealers. Now, onto her active abilities. Her other abilities haven't been buffed, but I'll go over the ones still worth using. You can upgrade Blade of Crystal as a replacement for Blade of Salvation down the line outside of Clash of Wills. Purifying Slash has a Dispel. She has 4 different enervation abilities: Water, Lightning, Ice, and Light. They each lower the enemy's elemental resistance by their respective element by 120%, imbue said element onto Elena, and increase their elemental damage by 35%. Reinforced Stance buffs her limit burst gauge fill rate by 200%. Way of the Blossom grants her team a 50% general mitigation buff, a HP barrier, and raises the damage modifier of Blade of Crystal. Way of the Aurora raises her attack and magic by 300% and makes Blade of Crystal stronger. However, it must be noted that the modifier buffs will not stack with each other. Now, here are the new abilities. They each deal hybrid damage that chains of Bolting Strike, and get stronger when used in the presence of a morale gauge, scaling as morale rises. Blade of Salvation is normal. Crystal Refraction lowers the enemy's ice and light resistance by 130%, grants her a 150% demon and human killer buff, and deals damage. Piercing Prism can be used twice per battle. It inflicts a 25% sword imperil, raises Elena's accuracy, and attacks the enemy. Passives. She gets one new ability that makes her much stronger. Here stats, pushes the chain modifier cap, and gets her a double killer against demons and humans. Otherwise, her passives remain the same. Give her a single weapon to raise her stats further and you'll be golden. Onto her Limit Burst. It doesn't get any stronger, unfortunately. Time to change forms. Elena has a True Brave Shift, which has no limitations whatsoever. Active abilities. Radiant Shield grants her team a 30% general mitigation buff, resistance to stop and charm, and recovers some of Elena's HP. Shining Northern Lights imbues light onto your team, and raises their light damage by 15%. Glacial Southern Lights is the same thing, but with ice. Crystal Refragmentation removes any imperos on your team, then grants them a literal 100% elemental resistance buff. This is insane, but I'll talk about it later. Protection of the Azure Crystal grants Elena a 80% general mitigation buff, a big HP barrier, and enables a triple cast. Blessing of the Azure Crystal cures any breaks on her allies, gives them resistance to breaks, and raises their stats by 280%. After 2 turns, it drops to 250%, which is still pretty decent. Legendary Heroine literally fills the morale gauge. Beloved Heroine does the same thing, but only has 2 uses. It does fill it up more though. Passives. With her Trustmaster reward or Super Trustmaster reward equipped, she gains more defense and HP, a Guts buff, resistance to stop and charm, and a 50% camouflage buff. She has a lot of defensive buffs, but what's really interesting is the morale gauge connection. If the gauge is above 100, your team will automatically get a double 160% killer buff against demons and humans. If it's lower than 100, it automatically grants them a 50% general mitigation buff and a 5000 HP barrier. Finally, her Limit Burst. It grants your team a double 150% killer buff against demons and humans, raises their stats by 280%, and grants them a whopping 10,000 HP barrier. Let's prioritize Brave abilities. Raise them all. Crystal Refraction for bigger imperos, Protection of the Azure Crystal for more defensive buffs, and Auroral Energy for more defensive passives. Time to make a damage rotation. I'll be using her as a light damage dealer, and assume she's holding her Trustmaster reward or Super Trustmaster reward. On turn 1, cast Way of the Aurora, Luminous Enervation, and Crystal Refraction. On turn 2, activate her Limit Burst. On turn 3, cast Blade of Salvation or Blade of Crystal, depending on whichever one's more advantageous, then finish it up with Crystal Refraction and Piercing Prism. Then, just keep triple casting the first move. Remember to reapply her buffs when necessary, and throw in Crystal Refraction whenever it's ready. So how good is Elena? Her damage output skyrockets in Clash of Wills with the morale gauge, but outside of it her damage falters significantly. But her support abilities more than make up for it. The biggest thing is by far the 100% team-wide elemental resistance buff. The Imperial removal isn't as reliable, as it's only a matter of the enemy reapplying it before the cooldown ends, but the effect duration of the elemental resistance buff is perfect enough to keep it up 100% of the time. The true Brave Shift really helps, letting Elena access her support abilities when you please. Her other support abilities aren't as good, but they work. 30% general mitigation isn't that much, though she has a better one just as accessible on her base form. Stop and charm resistance isn't that rare, but still appreciated. Her stat buffs are great, but not extraordinary, and the elemental effects and killer buffs are only useful when needed. Nevertheless, put it all together and you have a compact support unit, covering breaks, stop, and charm resistance, elemental resistance, and imbuing elemental damage. 100% elemental resistance is very good, and Elena's personal buffs drastically improve her survivability. Though admittedly, it is a bit odd to put those on a support. It's nice that she has good tenacity, but she won't be able to save the rest of her team if they've fallen in battle. As you might expect, she's best used in Clash of Wills, possessing the ability to straight up fill the morale gauge just by being there, but she's just as usable outside of it too. Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, leave a like and subscribe. Comment below what you think of Elena. I'm incredibly glad to see that her skill set isn't just skewed for Clash of Wills, ensuring a good amount of use even outside of it. Sure, her viability may diminish outside of Clash of Wills, but she's skilled enough to compensate. It's an excellent direction to take in unit design, and I hope the developers continue on this path as they further improve Clash of Wills.